Johnson & Wales University and the Distinguished Visiting Chef Committee proudly presents the Distinguished Visiting Chef Series, an educational resource and video reference library for culinary students and professionals. Today's guest, Chef Eric Sparks.
Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
Good morning. Wonderful, wonderful, wonderful. It's great to be here. My name is Peter Lehmiller. I'm the Dean of the College, and it is my pleasure to welcome you all to the 171st Distinguished Visiting Chef presentation. Today, we will have a great time. We have one of the leading research chefs in the United States with us, who is also an alum. This man once sat where you sat, and is now one of the leading chefs in the United States. He has a story to tell you today, I think, that you will find very, very engaging because it can be done. It's an important story, it's a great story, and I now would like you to welcome, without further ado, a warm Providence welcome on a cold day to Chef Eric Sparks.
Wow. Thank you. Thank you very much. Nice to see everybody. I always thought about standing up here one day, although we didn't have this back in the day, but I'm really thrilled to be here. I'm so glad you guys are here through the storm. You don't have to thank me for bringing it from the Midwest. I'll bring you some more here this weekend. I'm Eric Sparks, like he said, and I graduated in 1982 from culinary. And then I had the opportunity to go on and be a teaching assistant. And it was a little bit of a struggle at the time. They only selected 11 TAs, and I didn't make the first cut. And I hung in there, and then they selected 11 more, and I made that cut, and I was so excited because I really didn't have a lot of plans if I wasn't going to come back. And so, a funny story, I played on a baseball team, and I remember it was up by Brown University. So I tried calling my parents to tell them the excitement, and they weren't home. Tried calling my girlfriend, she wasn't home. So I run up to the baseball field to tell all my teammates that I had gotten TA, and there were 4 other guys on the team that had gotten it. But anyway, it was the beginning of a pretty cool journey. And you know, as a teaching assistant, it put you at a level where a lot was expected. You had to maintain your grade point average, you had to work, you had to teach. And I put in a lot of hours, and I was able to be mentored by quite a few people. And at the time, I didn't look at it as being mentored. I kind of looked at it like I was working for them, but little did I know that they were putting little chips in my mind that was going to help drive me the rest of my career. And I would pull back on those every once in a while, and I think back now, and some of those people are in this room today that's had some impact on me. So after I was a fellowship, and I graduated with my 4-year degree, I stayed on 1 more year to work at a commercial site called the Chef and Apprentice Restaurant. And that was open to the public, and it was run by second-year culinary students, so we'd get them for 5 days. And the menu was designed around cooking techniques and serving techniques. And it was really good for me because it helped me to really solidify techniques. cooking techniques. And that's one thing that I really believe in is solid foundation. And if you don't have a solid foundation on something, practice, because it will serve you very well. So after I did that stint, it was time for us to leave. And to be quite honest with you, my wife and I sat down with a map, and we said, where do we want to live in the United States? So we picked 3 areas, and then we spent a week in each area. We picked Houston, we picked Boston, and we picked the Raleigh-Durham, Chapel Hill area of North Carolina. Anybody here from Raleigh-Durham? No? Okay. That's a beautiful part of the country. So you know what? We picked up and we moved down there. And I started my career as a chef. And I was fortunate enough to work with people who taught me an awful lot about hospitality. When you cook, you don't necessarily just cook what's on the menu. You cook with your soul. You cook for that customer that comes in and they've been there twice and you kind of know what they order, so you make them something special just to be hospitable. So I learned that, and I did an awful lot of cooking for about 7 years. I did competing. I got to the point where I wanted to test my skills against other chefs. So I joined the ACF and I started competing. I competed locally, then I competed statewide, and then I grew and started competing nationally. And I got beat good a couple of times. Yeah, but I learned from that. I would watch what the other chefs were doing, solid techniques, great presentation. They carried themselves with such honor, and I watched and I paid attention. So then I started competing and I started having success. And I worked my way up to the final place, which was a private city club in Raleigh, North Carolina. And I loved my job. I was being paid a lot of money. I was able to pay my staff a lot of money. Our guests were all members, so I was able to do some incredible food. But I knew at that point, I was 30 years old, I knew I had reached a point where my next step is going to have to be New York, Los Angeles, Chicago, Dallas, because I knew if I wanted to get to the next level of a chef, I had to go do that. But another opportunity came knocking, and that was research and development. And I pushed it off because I was scared. I didn't want to go into it. I didn't know if I was going to make any money. I didn't know if I was going to be good at it. And so I froze a little bit for a couple of months. But this gentleman continued to call me. His name is Franz Ecker. He's a 1978 Olympic gold medalist for the United States Culinary Olympic team. And he wouldn't take no for an answer. So he finally said, "Tickets in the mail, you're coming out to see me." Now this is in Lexington, Kentucky. I was concerned at the time that I'd be the only person with front teeth in Lexington, Kentucky. And that's God's honest truth. So I fly into Lexington, and it's absolutely beautiful country. So I fly into Lexington, and this man picks me up. And now, of course, I'm intimidated right away. Okay, this guy is a pioneer in research and development. Why he's reaching out to me? Networking. He knew somebody that knew me, and he was unhappy. He couldn't find a chef to be his protege, so to speak. And he had interviewed 32 people in the Midwest, and he wasn't happy. So I sat with this man for 4 hours, and I knew right then and there I was going to leave the security of my job. I was going to sell my house. I was going to pull my kids out of school, and I was going to move from North Carolina to Lexington, Kentucky, and take on this new task. So I did. I didn't have to take a cut in pay, which was good. And now I got into this, I'm working in a lab now, not in a kitchen. So I didn't have the camaraderie that you have in a kitchen. It's a different mindset. And I'm telling you, the first year and a half, I had no idea what I was doing. I left something I was very, very good at. People wanted my opinion. People would, newspapers would call me and say, "What are you doing for your spring menu?" I was pretty important, I thought. I got into research and development. Nobody knew who I was. Nobody cared who I was. So it shocked me in my character a little bit, but I hung in there, and I paid attention, and then I had to learn the metric system, and I had to scale everything, and then I had to cook in a kettle, and I had to take it out and weigh it, and then recalculate the percentages. I had to learn computers. So it was extremely taxing on me because I didn't know if I could do it. But finally, a switch went off, and I started to gain some confidence. And I was with Franz for 3 years, and I was just getting good. And he said, "You know what? We're going to merge with a plant, with a manufacturer." And I said, "No, I said, you don't have to give me any more raises. I don't want any more bonuses. I want to stay here. Because I was starting to get comfortable again. He said, no, you really don't have a choice. I said, okay. So we joined Park 100 Foods, and I moved to Indianapolis. And then I actually spent more time in plants. So there was another learning curve there. So you're going to see some photographs today, and I'm going to walk you through. But now what I do is we create gold standard recipes. We then blend food science with the culinary art to create manufacturing formulas. Some of those have to meet certain nutritional needs. Some have to meet certain sodium levels. Some have to, there's all types of criteria we sometimes have to meet. So we start with about 2,500 gram batches, 5,000 gram batches, and we use solid culinary techniques as much as possible. Now we'll use functional ingredients where necessary and where what's going to help us to make this freeze-thaw stable. Most of the products we run are frozen. We do some shelf-stable products. We do not do any retail. So I know you've eaten food that I've touched because we supply companies like Panera, Wendy's, Chili's, Einstein, Boston Market, Jason's Deli. So a lot of them have their own R&D teams. They might create a gold standard, but then they come to us and say, Eric, I need you and your team to scale it up. So once we're done with the lab batch, and we use all of our QC techniques, and I'll talk about that today, we then take it to the kettle. And when you go to the kettle, you're going to run 5,000 pounds. And I'm going to show you some of the equipment today as we go through the procedures so you'll kind of get an idea of what you're faced with when you scale up. When you make a mistake at the kettle, it's not like I can put it in a Ziploc bag and put it in a cooler because it's 5,000 pounds or 600 gallons. So there's a lot of preparation and a lot of discipline that we have to employ. I have a team of 7 or 8 people that are chefs, but we're called hybrids. So they have a culinary background, but they know enough about food science to be pretty dangerous because we are applying it. We're not doing it in theory, we're actually applying it. So I'm going to share some techniques with you today that might be a little different if there's food science in here. You might say, well, boy, why are you dispersing the gum and oil? Well, there's a reason for that, because I know what happens at the kettle. And you're in a cook room, and you've got 8 kettles going, and there's steam, and there's moisture, and there's certain things that you have to do to protect yourself. So I'm going to share some of those techniques with you today. What else can I say? So you're going to see the plants. You're going to see photographs. I'll talk through it. Please raise your hand, ask me questions if you want to along the way. But it all started here, and I did not have a plan to say, hey, in 30 years, I'm going to be this. I didn't have that plan. But what I did do is I took advantage of opportunities that were in front of me. And sometimes opportunities don't look like opportunities, right? But you've got, this is how I drive myself. I show up, and I show up prepared. And you know what? If it doesn't pan out, it doesn't pan out. But if you don't show up and you don't show up prepared, you're guaranteed it's not going to work out. And if an opportunity presents itself and you take it and you find out it's not what you want, this country is wide open. You don't need a passport. You can pick up and go. And I've moved a lot. My bride isn't here today. She'll be here this afternoon. But my oldest daughter went to 9 different schools before she graduated. But we moved because of my career. We moved because I always wanted to do something better. I tended to stay very private. I didn't work for large corporations. I preferred private restaurants as well as this manufacturer because I can control my own destiny a little bit better. I can have an impact on my career without having to stay in some really tight regimented. Now that has its challenges because it's very, what's the word I want to look for? It's entrepreneurial. And entrepreneurial can be scary because you're taking chances. But boy, the payoffs are awesome. So that's what we do now. Park 100 Foods has 3 USDA plants based in Indianapolis. We have 3 shifts a day. We have 450 employees. And we run about 180 million pounds of product this year. We will run, you'll see the kettles there, we'll run 280,000 pounds of one product in one day out of one plant. So what I do and what my team does, if we're not prepared and you go to the kettle, it gets ugly pretty fast because they're not going to wait for you It's not like you just run one kettle and you kind of wait. Your first batch you do, but then all of a sudden it scales up and there's 7 kettles loaded before you realize you made a mistake. And I've been there and I've done that. So you learn along the way. So I have a very lovely assistant, Toriana Foster, who's going to be cooking for us today. And I'm going to walk us through. Once again, you guys have the formulas in front of you. I'm going to highlight some of the functional ingredients and why we are blending them in. Feel free to fire away and ask me questions as we go. So go ahead, Toriana, fire it up. So we've already done a dry run on Tuesday, so she should be pretty self-sufficient going through this. So let's talk about the turkey sausage first. If you look at that in your recipes, this sausage, what we try to do is, when you buy sausage pre-made, it's got stuff in it. You can't control the sodium as much as you'd like. You can't control the fat. You can't control the flavor. So what we do, once again, applying the culinary art, is we will buy the turkey and then we will use our own seasoning. That way, I'm not buying a sausage that's already been cooked, it's already been frozen. Now I'm going to heat it back up again, and I'm going to freeze it again, then the customer's going to heat it again. I end up with a much better product. So this turkey sausage is pretty basic. You see we've got the ground drum. I have some disodium inosinate and guanylate. That's an umami. It's a nucleotide. It helps to push flavor. So I don't have a lot in there because turkey is generally sweet anyway, but we push that along. And you can see the flavoring is pretty basic. I didn't try to make a chorizo out of this because I only want it to be the protein in the soup. You'll notice the very last ingredient down there is Supro EX45. That's a functional ingredient. It's a isolated soy protein. It comes in powdered form. It's got about, I think, 91% protein in it. And why do I have that in there? Well, I'm going to tell you. If you take turkey and you start just cooking it, the ground turkey, throughout the process of making a soup, it tends to turn to sawdust. Right? You don't end up with any chunks. So what we do with beef is we put 1.5% salt in the beef when we grind it to help us maintain chunks for our chili. For this, I didn't want to put that much salt in it, so I used soy protein to help bind the meat. Okay, all we did was blend it in with it, and it'll help bind the meat, and it allows me, when I go into a kettle and I'm putting 925 pounds of meat in a kettle, I can get chunks and it doesn't turn to sand. So that's why the soy protein is in there. I didn't deliberately put it in there to add more protein value, but I put it in there so we could have some chunks. Now, since this sat an extra day, Tori's going to have to work it a little bit because that protein continues to bind. Okay, so, yes?
Is there another name that's known by that soy protein? Other than, like, you use Supro, which is obviously one particular.
Yeah, Supro comes from the Soleil company, actually out of Indiana. But they're our suppliers. And when we work with suppliers, they've got experts. And I mean, there's a lot of really smart people out there, a lot. And when you work with a supplier like, Soleil, it's amazing when you tell them, here's what I'm trying to do, what should I use? And then you talk to them what equipment you have and what your goal is, and then they can pretty much pinpoint for you. So our industry, there's a lot of intellectual properties and a lot of secrets. So once you team up with somebody, you can talk freely about what you're doing. So that's real important. But I don't know of another name. Isolated soy protein that's got 80, I think they give you a range, 80 to 91% powdered form, and then they're going to be pretty standard. So she's browning that sausage in some olive oil, very common. And when I formulate, I tend to break things down to say, okay, where's my liquid going to come from? Where's my flavor? How can I develop flavor so I'm not reaching for fake ingredients to give me flavor? So I look at it and say, okay, I'm going to get some nice juice out of my turkey sausage. I'm going to have some chicken broth here, which you'll see on the formula I'll talk about a little bit later. It's a concentrated chicken broth, but it's very clean label. You guys have seen bases before, right? Soup bases? Okay, you ever look on the ingredient statement for a soup base? Sometimes it's salt first, sometimes it's salt second. But it has hydrolyzed vegetable proteins, it's got ING, it's got salt, it's got fat, it's got other things that make the ingredient statement look big. Customers are getting scared of big labels anymore. So if they don't have it in their pantry, they're a little nervous about it. So we tried to develop something here by using our sausage juice and just our chicken broth to help build flavor. And then we're going to have seasonings, so that doesn't scare people either. Vegetables. What vegetables am I going to have in here to help create flavor? So you can see we've got onion, celery, carrots, garlic, and tomatoes. In this particular formula, we use fresh. We don't always use fresh in manufacturing. You use IQF. There's nothing wrong with IQF vegetables because they're picked at the peak of the season, they're frozen quick, and they're very, very consistent. Onions change throughout the year. Potatoes change throughout the year. Different parts of the world you get ingredients from. So we tend to use a lot of frozen. Why did I use fresh today? Because I've been showing the soup to restaurant chains for a year and a half. And when I talk to their R&D departments and I say I'm using frozen veggies, they're not prepared to handle that yet. So I just use fresh. Because what will happen is, I'll get them excited, they'll like it, then we give them the price. Then the purchasing guys take over, and then we'll plug in frozen where necessary. Okay? And you don't lose anything from that. So we do have the fresh vegetables there. Seasonings. As you can see, we've got 4 different types of chilies here, if you look at it this way. I've got a dried ground one, which is an ají amarillo, which is a Peruvian chili pepper. It's kind of light yellow in color. It's a fruity kind of heat. It's got an interesting heat, and so that's a powdered dry. We have fresh in the form of jalapenos, which you all know gives a kind of a different kind of heat in your mouth. We have roasted poblanos. So I'm trying to create layers of flavor. So you see we've got the dried, I've got the fresh sting, now I've got the light roasted flavor, and the last one is the chipotle, which is a paste that's made specifically for us, and all it is chipotle peppers, just pureed with water. 10% water, 90% chipotle peppers. And it's heat treated to keep the micros down. We used to do it all in-house, but our micro counts were high because chili peppers aren't the cleanest thing in the world. So we have it made for us now. So I've got smoke. So now I've got 4 different chilies giving me different flavors. Yes?
Sorry, I was just wondering if you brought the ají amarillo locally, or sorry, with you from where you've traveled, or if you found it locally, because I've been trying to find it, but I think the only place you can get it is online.
Well, I shipped in some ingredients, but we team up with a company called Woodland Foods out of Chicago, and they've got everything in the world. And so we buy our ají amarillo from them. And it's ground, and we get 50-pound bags, which is a lot of chili pepper. You notice I have yeast in here. How you doing? You okay?
Yep, moving on.
So I have yeast in here. Yeast is a great flavor potentiator. It has about 40% sodium in it, in this particular one. You can get them with reduced sodium, but they're more expensive. And yeast tends to help give a meaty, savory flavor push. That's why we have yeast in there. Okay? I have, yeah. Hi.
Is the yeast just for flavor or not for the organisms? Just wouldn't they die from the heat?
Yeah. When they make 101 real quick, they make a yeast cream. Okay, it's called cream yeast. And then that product is heat treated. The yeast dies, and it's autolyzed, which means I think it eats itself basically. Then they can filter it and take the membrane out so that the yeast, when mixed with water, is clear. If they don't take the cell membrane out, it's cloudy. Okay, but then depending on how long they cook it and how they treat it after that, will depend on what flavor it gets. So that's kind of a 101 on yeast. Okay.
Chef,
Yep.
celery and onions are in.
Okay. So we are following basic techniques. This is how we do it in the plant. It's going to go in. I'm going to show you some slides here in just a second. We've got chicken fat in here, but the chicken fat's basically with the natural flavor. You see down there, it'll say chicken flavor, WOMF, WONF. Does anybody know what that stands for? That's not an instructor? With other natural flavors, correct, right. And this is a roasted chicken note, and it's dispersed in fat, okay? It's really got a really nice aroma to it. So once again, we're trying to layer flavors. Think about it when you're working in a saute station. There's a reason you saute onions. There's a reason you might saute your shallots lightly. There's a reason you reduce your white wine. There's a reason you come in and reduce this, because you're layering flavors. We're doing the same thing manufacturing, but there's a limit. And once we realize what I cannot achieve using culinary art, that's where we blend the science in. That's where that comes into play. So we have some fresh cilantro, and we have some masa and some lime. The masa is going to be slurried with the starch later on. I'm going to show you masa being cooked in a kettle here in a minute as well. So we've got that going on. We've got the protein that I'm using in the formula, which is a turkey. What kind of garnish are we doing? We're going to do some IQF wheat berries and some spinach. And finally, what other functional ingredients do we have? We have modified starch. Now this is listed as modified starch. We have Freejex W, which is a Cadillac of modified starches. It comes from National Starch. It is chemically modified, which means it's cross-linked, and you've probably studied this. If you haven't, you will. It's important that you know it. They're cross-linked. It's very high in amylopectin, which allows for flowability upon freeze thaw, versus a non-modified starch or a native starch, which is high in amylose. So you've made turkey gravy at home with your families, I'm sure. You then take the leftover turkey gravy and you put it in a container. Tomorrow, when you have to eat leftovers again, you take the turkey gravy out and it comes out the shape of the container, right? And there's a little bit of water on the top. That's because that amylose in there isn't freeze thaw stable, and it isn't very stable, even though you didn't freeze it. And when you heat it back up, it doesn't necessarily come back to the same viscosity it was the day before. Modified starch will still flow out, and it'll come back to the same viscosity you had before. So we're using modified starch here. This starch has to go to 185 for minimum of 5 to 10 minutes. No different than roux. You know, when you work with roux, you bring it to a boil, you drop it to a simmer, and you usually cook it 10 minutes, depending how long you want. When you make your bechamel or your sausage gravies, you got to cook it longer, don't you? Right? How many times have you had a bechamel or a sausage gravy, and all of a sudden you say, it's not thick enough, I'm going to put more starch in it? A seasoned chef's going to tell you, stop, put the lid on it, and push it in the back of the stove. Just let it set, let it cook. Because there's so much fat in there, it surrounds those starch cells, and it inhibits them from growing, from soaking up water. So same thing in manufacturing. If you're not thick enough, you don't start pounding starch into it. You calm down, you take a breath, and you shut the lid and you hold it another 5 or 10 minutes. So that's what this starch is. This is a modified starch. The next item we're going to show you is going to have starch. It's physically modified, so I can label it as cornstarch and keep it clean label. Okay? So, we're rolling?
Yes, chef.
Okay. What I had her do was on Tuesdays we timed things, because everything in plants you want to be timed, and you want to shave as much time off as possible. So I'm going to go to the back and I'm going to show you some photos here of our plant, so you can kind of see what. Okay, what you see here is this is a basic workstation in our lab. Everything is scaled out. And this happens to be our newest station that we built for a young man by the name of Jay Cousin, who is a graduate of the Culinary Nutrition Program. Jay was an intern for 3 months. We extended it another 3, and then we made him an offer he couldn't refuse. And he's doing great. He's doing great. And why is he doing great? Because he takes direction well. He comes prepared every day. He listens. He studies when he needs to. He takes notes. He follows up. He's not afraid to work. So that's why I have told Jay, I said, you have the opportunity, not just from me, but you have the opportunity to be really, really, really good, because he's got that education. So that's his station right there. If we are developing something for Wendy's that's going to be microwaved, we're going to develop it so it can be heated in their microwave, and et cetera, et cetera. And that's a big deal. It's a big deal. I worked 1.5 years on a mac and cheese for a customer, so it could be microwaved and put in the thermalizer. She's doing a technique right now. I forgot we had gum in this. We have some xanthan gum in this product. Okay? Why do I have xanthan gum? Why do I really need it? Yes, I do. I'll tell you why I need it, because if you eat a really good chicken noodle soup, you know how you get that coating on your mouth from the gelatin of a good stock? But we're trying to mimic that here. Don't forget, what I make today might not be eaten for 5 months from now, right? And some kid in San Diego is heating it up and serving it to you. So I'm trying to build in what I can. So the gum kind of helps to coat that mouth a little bit and hold the flavor a little longer. And it's really clean. And 2 techniques you need to walk away with on gum today. Just 2 basic techniques. There's a lot more detail, but 2 basic techniques. Number 1, you must disperse the gum. This stuff doesn't play, because you'll end up with fish eyes, it'll ball up, it loves water. So in our plants, we disperse it in oil. If there's no oil in the formula, we put it in the formula. We put oil in the formula, regardless. Because when I'm adding that at the kettle, there's steam coming off, and if I just try to sprinkle it like I would in a laboratory, it's going to ball up, it's going to stick to the equipment and the shaft, and it's a mess. And then you're there with a strainer with 5,000 pounds of product trying to scoop out all the little balls of gum. Okay? So she dispersed it in oil, and then we will add it to the mass, and we will bloom the gum. So disperse and bloom. If you follow those 2 techniques, you will be successful working with gum. If you don't, you'll know it, and you'll never make the mistake again. Hopefully you won't do it on a 5,000 pound batch like I have. So she's going to be the agitation now. Ready? Get it going. Why don't you grab the whisk like we did yesterday, right? Just get it going in a circle here. Okay? So this is how we're going to do it at the kettle. Cook's going to have his agitation or her agitation going. You see how that gum's going in real nice for me? Another thing I want to make sure you understand is, where is my salt? My salt's still on the tray. Where is my acid? It's still on the tray. Tomatoes, which also have acid, it's still on the tray. When you're working with gum, you try to keep your environment sodium-free, acid-free. The more alkaline, the better, because if you have acid and you have salt in your environment, it inhibits the speed with which the gum will bloom. So we simply try not to put any acid or salt in there until the end. Okay? So this will take her about 3 minutes to get this gum bloomed a little bit. Remember to break up the bigger chunks if you have to. So that's the technique of the gum. So she's adding her slurry now. This is the masa, the yeast, and the starch. Why we put the yeast in there? Because yeast loves water and it'll ball up a little bit if you try to add it dry. So we slurry it. Still gets in there. And then she's going to, I broke her thermometer. Did you get a thermometer?
I did.
Okay. So she's going to bring it up to 185 minimum, and she's going to hold it for about 5 minutes. You'll probably stir every once in a while. And you notice I have her putting lids on, because in our plant we shut the lids a lot on the kettles because it's money going up the rafters. So, because our formulas are all built for 100%. We don't have a specific set of circumstances for every employee. For example, if we have someone that applies and they come in and the lights are on, and you talk to them, you say, okay, this person can go right up to that. Other folks will start on the floor and they'll work their way up. There's a lot of, part of my job is to help train the culinary part of doing that. There's manufacturing steps and the formula is written a certain way, but we still use terms like sweat, saute, cook until sweet. We use that term because we're a food company. And part of my job is to make sure we don't lose that, because it's real easy to say load, heat to 185, hold. You know what I mean? It becomes very, I don't know, like a factory. And I don't want our team to lose. They understand it's culinary. And we all wear chef coats. So they know when R&D comes in, it's going to be driven by culinary. So part of my job is to do that, and that's ongoing. That's always ongoing. But the training, we have other colored hair nets that are trainers. They reach a certain level. And they'll work with that person probably for 2-3 weeks before they leave them alone on there. But our cooks obviously are some of the highest paid employees we have. Besides, you're going to see some cryovac operators, and those guys fill the product into the bag. That's where you make your money, because if they overfill the bag, you lose money. So if you underfill the bag, you get in trouble. So those guys do a lot. Yeah. Yeah. The question is, how do we, do we scrape everything out? The answer is yes, because we have the hose. It's got high velocity, so they're able to spray everything right out into the kettle.
You said that hose is part of measurement, right?
Yes, sir. Yeah. So they put water onto their computer screen. They'll plug in, like you'll see me call water number 1, water number 2, water number 3, I think, in some of these formulas. We do the same thing on the plant, but they plug that into their screen, and they shut this valve so it doesn't go in the kettle, and then they'll use the hose. And then once they get to the end, they can't put more water in than they've already got set up on the meter. You know what I mean? So that's it. Anything else? Anybody else have any? Yeah. The question is, what do we do if there's a problem at the kettle with scaling? Well, what we've implemented here about 4 years ago is, let's say you're in our micro scaling area. So you're scaling. You okay? Okay. Let's just assume it's salt. Okay? Let's assume it's 35 pounds of salt. You scale it, and your supervisor validates on the tag that you've got the right weight. We then have another person, before it gets into the cook room, that puts it on a scale and looks at the tag, and they print off a tag that validates what it is. So we have two methods. It goes through 2 sets of checks before it goes in the kettle. Now, do we have mistakes? Yes. And that's usually when the bat phone rings and you go and you use your analytical measurements. You taste it. You say, hey, our salt doesn't taste right. It doesn't taste the way it should. Our salt meter is low. So you say, okay, then you got to do some background checks. And then what I will do is I'll take a sample out of the kettle. I'll put in the percentage of salt that I think is missing. We'll taste that, and then we'll go and add it to the kettle. But there's plenty of times when I scratch my head saying, are we sure we're putting 115 pounds of salt in this thing? Because that's a lot of salt. So, but that's how we do. Yeah, you have what's called rework. If you fail, it's called rework. And that hurts. Because that costs us about $2,000 a batch if you make rework, meaning you still pump it in a bag, and why is it rework? And then you try to rework it into the formulas later on. So, anything else? Once again, the big thing is with our QC department, we decide, why is it rework? That's the first thing we have to know. And if it's heavy on salt, we try not to rework more than 3%. But if it's heavy on salt, then we adjust the formula. We write a new formula, reduce the salt that's in the formula, and plug the rework in. Okay? And then once that rework's gone, then we go back to another version of the formula. But believe it or not, where most of our rework problems come from is raw material. So I spend 50% of my time in the lab evaluating raw material, whether it's onions, apples, carrots, potatoes, peas, celery, because we constantly have suppliers we're trying to approve. But now that we have a good arm around our raw materials and we're turning them over, we don't make too many mistakes at the kettle. But they used to be driven by raw material. When you have a raw material problem, you got 7 kettles that are affected right away. So that's how that happens. We have a chili on the market right now for one of our customers that has edamame in it. And we realized edamame was very firm, very firm. Well, what are we going to do? So we tried to find another supplier. They didn't have what we wanted. So we had to go back and say, okay, on this next crop, you need to cook it longer before you IQF it. But that still didn't solve my problem with what I'm running today. So we had to take a kettle and cook the edamame longer. And so there's an example if the blanch isn't right on veggies, if that's not right. So that's one example. So.
That's finished.
Okay. So now she's down to the finishing touches. You notice we have on the formula I have what's called final water. If we do want to do any testing of this product, and nutrition students in here, I want to talk about something really important. Is I know in your classes you're working with Bostwick's. Is it called a consistomometer? Yeah, we call it a Bostwick. Really important piece. It's a tool that we use on every batch of product we run, so we make sure our viscosity is consistent. If the viscosity is not consistent within a range, we might say at 140 degrees for 30 seconds, we should have a centimeter Bostwick of a 14, plus or minus 1. That means if that batch is too thin or too thick, we have to take action. It is not releasable. We might say the salt on it should be 1.0 plus or minus 0.1, because we'll accept that range. But if it's more than that, then you have to go and figure out why. pH. If it's important, we'll do the test. But a lot of times we can't control pH. We're cooking product, but we do record it. So when you guys are testing your products and you're listening to your instructors, it's really important because it's not just used by Park 100, it's used by everybody. It's a big deal. We also have what's called a Brookfield, which measures resistant to shear, and that's another way to test. Some customers insist we have Brookfield testing done. So that's the story there. Okay, so she's got it. She's going to add her final ingredients, which is going to be her garnish, her water, and stir it in. You want to know, how do we make sure all the product is equal through all the bags? Your pumping temperature, the more viscous something it is, the better it is, right? The easier it is to maintain your weights. So sometimes we will deliberately use a smaller filler pipe, which means the pump will call for product more frequently, which you don't have time for product to settle in the line. That's one trick that's used, okay? The other thing is there's these hoppers that are blended. So the product is being blended in the kettle. When it comes over to the filler, it's blended prior to going in the filler. So those are two methods that we use. These chains that we talk about, they have their own R&D team. They have their own R&D people. Their discipline isn't the same as mine, but they might come up with a gold standard. They might tour the country looking for the next salads of the world, or next soups of the world, or next sauces of the world. But then they'll come to us and say, hey, here's our idea. Will you help us do that? So R&D doesn't look just like what I do. I happen to have one specific discipline. Okay, there's a billion of them. Yes?
So do you guys get like different projects every day or every week, or do you just sort of keep doing the same thing every week depending on how people order?
Well, as far as the plants go, that's all plugged in. There's contracts and they just run. As far as R&D goes, we're working anywhere from 12 months to 2 years out. It's called delayed gratification. You know, it really is. You know, you work on something for a year and a half, and then by the time it goes to the kettle, it's like, you know, there's no fanfare. So that's an adjustment I had to make, and I work with my team on understanding. I just had a guy quit. I had a guy who was with us for a couple of years, and the pressure is intense, you know, to be absolutely perfect. Think about it. You have to be absolutely perfect when you go on the bench in there in your next class. Nothing can be wrong. You've got to watch cross-contamination. You've got to watch somebody else. You've got to scale everything. Your formula's got to be 100% perfect. Then it's got to go through freeze-thaw. And, you know, it can be really intense. This guy, Kevin, came to me and says, I'm done. I'm like, why? I mean, he's making good money. But he said, I can't handle the lifestyle of waiting. You know, he came from restaurants and all of that and everything, but he couldn't handle the waiting part. And you got to have thick skin too. You're starting, right? Okay. You got to have thick skin because it's criticism every minute of the day. It's criticism. You know, oh, it's too thick. Oh, it's too salty. Oh, it's not right. It's like, but you got to keep your chin up. And like I always tell people, you got to keep pushing. You just keep pushing. Did you have another follow-up?
Yeah, so do you guys all work on the same project? Or
No. Our guys will manage anywhere between 7 and 15 projects at a time. They have different deadlines, and we have a big system set up to help them. You know, I try to define the target really well for them by cost and ingredients and da-da-da-da, and then they go and attack it. And then we taste it, and they say, okay, this isn't right, and you don't take it personally, although you do. They always say don't take it personally, but you do. If you love cooking, you're going to take it personally. But it's a lot of criticism, and you just got to hang in there, especially when you're doing stuff for other chains, and you realize you know a lot more than they do, but you just got to suck it up and, yep, okay, and then, you know, that's hard. Yeah.
Do the chefs do the majority of the sensory analysis, or do you guys have a separate panel?
We do our own sensory, but once some of the chains will take it to their own sensory on their dime, not on our dime. You know, but no, yeah.
What policies and procedures do you have to like prevent cross-contamination and like microbial proliferation?
Well, it all starts with first and foremost is writing the specification of the raw material, inspecting the plants or facilities where it's coming from. That's the first. We have guys on the road that go to the Northwest and visit, our squash supplier. We have guys that go to New Jersey and go to the spinach growers. You know, we tell them how high up to cut the spinach. We tell them they have to inspect it twice, et cetera, et cetera. So we start there. Then when it comes into plant, it falls into a flow chart that's managed by several people of our team, and then the floor managers manage that. So that's that's how we do it. And then we schedule. You know, we're not going to schedule a product that we're adding raw meat to the kettle that might splash right next to a French onion soup. You see what I mean? So, and we'll move stuff from plant to plant if we have to do that. So that's kind of, in general, how we do it.
You were just mentioning how fat carries flavor. Are there any practical techniques that you could share when you are required to make a lower fat version?
Yeah. Yeah, low fat is difficult to work with. But what we did is, I got to the point where you keep trying to use industrial ingredients, okay? And finally I said, you know what, as a chef, what's a chef gonna do? What would I do if I was just a cook? Forget the R&D side. So we tend to use more purees to help with body and mouthfeel and texture. That is a good way to reduce the fat. And then you can also use starch or hydrocolloids to help build body. Seems that when you're doing low fat, if you can have body and texture, that takes away a lot of the sins of not enough fat in the product. So those are some of the techniques that we will use if we're doing we're trying to do a low fat minestrone soup. We'll put what we call the rutabaga and some potatoes and some onions, and we'll put them in up early, and we cook them to death and turn the agitation up, and it kind of builds that background for us, and it allows us to have less fat in the product as well.
So just more body is the main thing.
That's the main thing, yeah. Yep. And then, is there acid? Can you play off of acid? Because you can't, usually if it's low fat, you're looking for low sodium as well. Usually that's a problem. Someone else have a question? Yeah.
Are you one of the few plants that use fresh produce or fresh ingredients, or how frequently?
I think there's plenty of manufacturers that use fresh. I always say if you can get credit, for fresh, use it. But if you're not going to get credit, don't, because it's going to be more consistent using IQF. Chicken noodle soup, you can use frozen celery, you can use frozen onions, but I would suggest using fresh carrots, because you get credit for a fresh carrot in a chicken noodle soup. Yeah.
You have been working with a chain restaurant or something of that nature for a long time. You've gotten to know how they go about their business, how they usually come up with ideas. If you have a good idea for a concept for their company, how would you go about portraying it?
Well, what we do is we contact them and say, hey, I'd like to come down and show you something. I want to show you a concept. So you kind of talk it out, and you make an appointment, and you go down there, and you go prepared. We go down with, if they're a company we share formulas with, we share it with them. But we'll do a nutrition facts panel, an ingredient statement. We'll come down and we'll actually get into the kitchen and we'll actually present it. If there's carriers, what they call platforms, like flatbreads are a big platform. So we will get there and use their flatbread and show our products on flatbread, kind of finished goods, if you will. So that's how we do it.
Do you encourage your employees, if they think they have a good idea, and will they come and talk to you about it, and then see if it's worth putting funds into to start the design? Or how would that?
Yes, to a point. If somebody says, hey, I was in Rhode Island and I had an incredible celeriac soup, with curry, you might say, okay, that's something. Let's work that up and we'll have it on hand when somebody comes in. But for the most part, it's very rarely do I go to the team and say, I want you to create 4 new soups for so-and-so. It happens, but not as frequently as I think I would like it to be. Because there's always these parameters, It's got to be $22 a case, and it's got to be this, and you're trying to build the best product you can for your parameters that you have to stay within. Because every batch, we pull 1 bag for the taste table. So that taste table, in this plant, we'll probably do 2 or 3 taste tables a day because you've got anywhere between 30 and 50 batches to look at. And in there's a book that has a description of sensory attributes of the product, what it's supposed to look like, and you taste it. You taste it, you make your comments, and you sign the book. And you would be surprised of one thing, how consistent the plant will be. And you'll also be surprised that if it's wrong, it's probably going to be wrong in all the batches, because they're very consistent about that. Because at the end of the day, it's food. It is food. We are not making widgets. We're making food. And when a customer gets even though I can brag about doing 35 batches of soup, When you go into Panera, you're only going to get one 8-ounce portion. That's it. One. And he's judging me on that 8-ounce portion. That's all he's getting. So we really drive these guys to be absolutely perfect. If you're not shooting for perfection, what are you shooting for? You know, that's how I live, and it can wear you out if you let it. But you have somebody have a question? Yeah.
So say if you just did like a first trial run and it was only 5,000 pounds or something like that, would you get it to this point and then test it against what you originally made in the lab?
Yes, you do. Very good question. Part of the discipline of research and development is you make your, once you finally get your formula ready to go to the kettle, the day before, or a couple days before, you have a production meeting with everybody, right? Making sure you got the HACCP plan, everything is lined up regulation-wise. Then you go to the plant and you get the raw materials the plant's going to use to make your batch. Then the day before, you make a fresh batch of product, you validate all your QC numbers, and then you take that fresh batch to the kettle with you. So you're able to taste your batch versus the kettle batch. Then, if you release it, the next day, you take a frozen bag from production and a frozen bag that you've made in the lab, and you compare it again. And sometimes you'll perform post-freeze analyticals, which is very important as well, to make sure you're in range. And if you've done your homework, you're gonna be fine. Well, the question is, do we do freeze-thaw testing? Well, and you have to think, you can only cook as fast as you can freeze. That's the stopgap in manufacturing. So if I'm going to load 8 kettles, I better be able to pump and cool 8 kettles, right? So we test in the lab, hey, can we case freeze this product? That means we can turn the belts up faster and pack the product at, say, 36 degrees. Now that's going to be a little bit icy around the edge. The center will be 36. And we put that in a case. Then we'll send that case down to a warehouse to freeze, and it might take 3 days to totally freeze solid, or even more than that, depending. So, but you end up with a different product. So that's where we wrestle from the culinary side. I want to freeze everything fast because I want the best eating quality when it thaws out. Sometimes you don't have that option. And the mac and cheese, I tested different fill temps. I tested fast freeze, slow freeze, IQF pasta, fresh pasta. It was very humbling. Well, we run 6 million pounds now, so I'm pretty excited. The smallest, if we're really not feeling good about something, I just ran one for a chain. I did an Alfredo sauce, and we ran 1,500 pounds. You can take full use of the agitation, but you're not stuck with 2,000 pounds in case it doesn't work. So a typical pilot for us will be about 1,200 to 1,500 pounds. And that kind of gets what that also does for me is I like to get the customer in. If I can get them in with me, the hook is set. I got them for life now. But sometimes they're intimidated and sometimes they don't care. So you'd be very surprised at these restaurant chains out there who have quality assurance people and their R&D people, and they have no idea how their product's made. Absolutely no idea whatsoever. So my goal is to get them in there and work side by side so they can meet the cooks, they can meet the other people that are putting me up on their shoulders, Yeah.
Yeah, when working with some of the functional ingredients in batches, do you notice like a difference in like smaller amounts compared to like larger amounts, or does the ratio stay?
It's a good question. It is pretty linear. It's pretty. That's the beauty of industrial ingredients. They don't change, when you scale up. But I will tell you this: if you've got a soup that's got a lot of frozen veggies in it, okay. If I took 10 pounds of those veggies and I thawed them out, I'd get a certain amount of liquid. But if I take 1,000 pounds, my ratio of liquid is going to be a little bit more. So I have to prepare myself when I go to the kettle. I might have to make an adjustment, not only just viscosity, but also flavor. So I'm going to get a little bit more out of that. But for the most part, everything else stays the same.
Yeah, what goes wrong with the batch? Like, it's so wrong that you can't fix it. What do you do with the product? You just throw it all out?
No. We try to fix it at the kettle. If there's a problem with the product, we try to fix it at the kettle. Okay? Do our very best. If not, then we follow safety, cooling curves, get it cooled down, and then we get it filled, and it's considered rework. Is it rework? Or is it to the point where, we're just going to donate it. And we donate a lot of raw materials. All of our lab samples that are left over, we donate to soup kitchens, shelters, all of that. And we're real big on that kind of stuff. So that's what will happen. Okay, you can see I gave you a range formula. This is an example of what might be on a specification for a customer. The other reason I gave you this formula the way I did is because it's currently in the market in test. But I wanted to show it to you to talk about emulsions. Not emotions, emulsions. Scaling up a very high-fat product and you're trying to emulsify it is a real challenge. From a formulator standpoint, it's a real challenge in manufacturing. So you can see on this, now this particular sauce was designed to try and mimic hollandaise to a point, okay, to a point. And we also had to have this sauce change a little bit as it cooled so it wouldn't fall off of a sandwich and continue to run. So poor Tori and these guys got all freaked out on Tuesday because they couldn't believe what it kind of looked like. But it's a kind of an interesting formula. So you can see we got sea salt, red pepper, we got butter. You can see we got about 18% butter in there. Let's talk about some industrial ingredients. You have lecithin, right? Where does the lecithin come when you make a hollandaise from scratch? The egg yolk, right? Okay. So we're using lecithin here. This happens to be labeled as all natural. Okay, so we didn't use propylene glycol or monodiglycerides or datum or any other emulsifier. We used lecithin. We've got several hydrocolloid systems in here to maintain this sauce with the characteristic that the customer wants. So you can see we've got gum, another hydrocolloid. We've got some cream cheese. We've got dried egg yolks. You can see the other ingredients. And then we have some whey protein concentrate. Whey protein concentrate's a really neat ingredient to work with because you can drive flavor kind of towards the acidic. If you're making a cheddar cheese sauce and you want some body and you want some sharpness, an acid whey protein concentrate will give you that versus trying to put more cheese in it. If you want a sweet dairy creamy, which is what we've got here, this whey protein is kind of creamy, but it helps build body. This sauce has to be freeze-thaw stable, has to be microwaved to 185 degrees, and then they're going to hold it for 6 hours on a steam table. So this can't be your everyday hollandaise, all right? So I had to build this with a lot of muscle, so to speak. Okay, so I'm going to walk you through the procedures because there is some method behind this madness. You notice on the very first thing we're combining sea salt and cayenne pepper together and we're reserving it. We're doing that because if I try to add cayenne pepper to the kettle, it's going to ball up on me. So I have to disperse it because it's very powdery, obviously, right? We put our butter in first, and then we're going to add our lecithin. This lecithin is a powdered product. It's an oiled lecithin. And technically, you know that lecithin has phosphatidylcholines, which is the choline is the part that does the emulsifying. This particular one has boosters in it to give me more power, and I can use the same lecithin. I don't have to have 20 lecithins in my quiver, you know, I just have the one. So you put the lecithin in and we're going to melt this. If you get it too hot, you tend to scorch. It gets kind of a scorch flavor, so you don't want to get it too hot. Then we're adding the gum right to the fat. Okay, so I've dispersed it. I'm not blooming any gum yet, right? It's all fat. Well, there's some water, but not enough that's going to bloom me yet. High agitation. Now I'm going to add my water. And think about this, I'm at a kettle, I open the valve, and as the water goes in, I got my agitation going fast. Now I'm blooming my gum, okay? Lecithin helps bind fat too. Then we're gonna add our cream cheese. This is kind of for body of the sauce throughout its life. We're gonna melt that out. I put 10 minutes down here. Cream cheese can really be a monster at the kettle, so does it take us 10?
Yeah, less than 10.
Yeah. So now I'm building my mass. Over here, we're going to slurry some egg yolks, dry egg yolks, and then they'll go into the kettle. You notice that the starch here only goes to 170. The other starch I told you went to what degree? Does anybody remember? 185. Anybody wonder why I don't want to put a starch at 185 in here? What?
Tighten up, right? Too quick.
Yeah, what else? Why wouldn't I just use the same starch? Okay. An emulsion, what breaks emulsions? Bingo. Too much heat will break an emulsion. Too cold will break an emulsion. pH change, rapid changes in pH will break an emulsion. When your hollandaise breaks, when you make it, if you leave it under the heat lamp, it gets too hot, it's going to break. If it gets too cold, it's going to break. So we're using a starch here that only has to, it cooks out at about 160 to 165. It's what they call a low temp starch. We're going to take it to 170 and we're going to hold it. And the reason we have to hold it a little bit longer is because of the amount of fat. Right? It'll still do its job, but I have to, so we're only going to go to 170. So I'm not stressing the emulsion as much right now. I'm trying to build this emulsion. Yeah?
Was this the physically modified starch?
This is a physically modified starch, yes. It's labeled as cornstarch.
Less cross-linked?
Well, I personally believe it does, and I'll tell you why. He asked me, modified starches are cross-linked, right? And they're pretty durable. The physically modified starch versus chemically modified starch isn't as powerful. I can't shear it like I can Freejex W, the modified starches. So it's not as strong in our application. Now the starch guys will tell you different, but we invite them out to look at slides and then they realize that, well, you're adding a little bit more shear than we thought. So, but yes, it is my belief that they're not as powerful as a chemically modified starch. So we're going to hold it about 5 minutes. Then we're going to add our salt and cayenne blend together. Then we'll finish up with the rest of our ingredients. And pretty much the last thing that's going to go in is going to be the whey protein concentrate slurry. And I'm going to come help you with that. Is that right? Yes, sir. Okay. So the whey protein concentrate is going to help us build body as well. And our color here is an all-natural color. And it's mango shade is what they call it. You'll also notice that this color of this sauce is going to be a little bit brighter than a normal hollandaise. The reason being is that's the marketing department telling us we need it to stand out on this sandwich a little bit better. So we put more color in it. A natural color is not as durable as an artificial color. Heat and acid tend to diminish a natural color. But this, you'll see, this is kind of bright. It's not neon, but it's not far from it. But it does the job.
Don't break this one.
Okay. Yeah, you weren't lying. Okay, good. So as you notice, what else are we doing through this emulsion is acid, not in there right now. Salt, there's still a big push of salt coming. That's not in there yet. Color isn't in there yet. Once again, I'm trying to keep the environment as pristine for this gum and these hydrocolloids to do their job. You ready for that? Is this for this, right?
This slurry?
Yeah. Well, it looks like this stuff got cold on us, huh? Okay. When you see us making slurries, this is where this would be made in that room where I showed you the gentleman in there. Once again, it's preparation. And part of my job, and you guys have to understand this too, you're going to be leaders. Whether you like it or not, you're not going to go out and just work on a saute line the rest of your life, right? You're going to college, you're getting your degrees, you're going to hit a point in your life where you're going to become a leader. And then your success is based upon the people you're leading. And that's a difficult thing to do. Not everybody can be a leader. You think you can be a manager and all that, but leading people is setting them up for success. That's what I did for her on Tuesday. It took us a while. We got a little bit stressed. But you know what? I had to set her up to be successful today. So remember that, right?
Sure.
We're going to strain this just to make sure we don't have any... I am a VMAG dumper. Yeah? So now you're going to come back up. Now she's just basically going to get lethality steps. So that's important. Anybody have any other questions or anything? Yes?
Whey concentrate over whey isolate, is price the main reason you're using the concentrate, or are there other benefits to having more of the purities?
I bet cost has something to do with it. And this, we just are comfortable. When you get some ingredients, you get comfortable with them. And this happens to be one functional whey protein concentrate that we're very comfortable with. And I know what I'm going to get out of it. I know what it's going to do. I know what percentage is going to do for me. So that's why we don't use whey protein isolate, I think, at all in any of our formulas. So did that answer your question?
Yeah, it's twice the price from a retail standpoint. So I
Is
assume
it?
that there's a huge,
It's higher in protein, right?
yeah, 90%.
Yeah, whenever you get more protein, price goes up. That's pretty much it. Anybody else? Okay. So what we're going to do is we're going to serve some lemon butter that we made the other day, and we're just going to serve it on a piece of basically steamed fish with a little bit of brunoise, fennel, parsnip, carrot, and leek, and let the lemon butter kind of be the hero. The one comment I have about this particular sauce is I think it's, for me, I think it's a touch salty because it was designed to carry bread, egg, you know, it was designed to carry more. But I didn't, you know, I just want to get you the whole concept here. I actually do think I pulled some salt out of it, but it's still there. So now she's going in with her lemon juice concentrate. Here, you want a whisk and I'll help you. So you can see the color of this sauce. Now watch, it's gonna light up our life.
Magic.
Yeah. So I'm putting this in at the end because it's not very heat stable. There it comes. So the takeaway I want you folks to walk out of here with today on this particular sauce is the hydrocolloids that were used to help bind this together. And, you know, it might not seem like it's important right now, but it's more important tomorrow when after it's frozen. And, you know, when something goes through distribution, the temperature goes up and down all the time and through storage and through its shelf life. So we need to stabilize these things as much as possible. And once again, this is all natural. The beauty of all natural is there's no definition for all natural. Right? You guys follow the news? There's no, they're trying to figure it out. So we'll ask a customer, do you want all natural? And if they do, sometimes it's a little more money because you have to watch some of your ingredients, but all natural is an interesting deal, yeah.
Does Park 100 Foods have a definition as to what natural is?
No. We don't. We go by customer. We ask them, what is your definition of all natural? And then they'll say, well, what is so-and-so doing? We'll say, well, why don't you look at their label and you'll see what it is. But minimally processed is a big deal for folks. And but if somebody said, hey, we want this all natural, we're going to make it a certain way. So I guess we do. We do, but we don't. We let our customer tell us. They have a list of what they like. Whole Foods, right? You guys all know what Whole Foods is. A lot of restaurants their chains look at the Whole Foods list and they try to put that on us and say, okay, we don't want any of these ingredients in there. And sometimes we can achieve that and sometimes we can't.
Do you ever get to a point where you can't get past something and you need to ask them if they want to change what's going on? Yeah.
Yes. Yeah, the answer is yes. You know, some of the other things that come with this all natural, let's say, oh, well, I don't want any color. I don't want any artificial colors. I don't want any other colors added. Well, raw materials are agriculture, right? Once again, they're not nuts and bolts we're putting in a kettle. We're putting raw materials in. So if we're going to make 14 million pounds of sweet potatoes for somebody, and they're not going to let us put a natto in there to maintain a consistent color throughout the year, they're going to have different colored sweet potatoes. As much as we really try to get the raw material, you know, Beauregard, they come from North Carolina and Texas. We want them blanched. We want them peeled. We want all this. We set the spec. But if they better be prepared to have some different colors throughout the season. And are they willing to deal with that, or do they want a kind of consistent color? That's where we try to tell them science is going to help you here. Let's put a natural color in there, and then you'll have a consistent color throughout the year.
Do you ever take, like say, sweet potatoes throughout the season and blend them?
Good question, yes. Yes, we do. We try to have East Coast and West Coast suppliers when possible. When we do spinach, we do a lot of cream spinach. We'll get a West Coast and an East Coast, even though the spinaches taste different. Spinach ain't spinach, okay? East Coast spinach tends to be a little bit sweeter, a little more earthy, if you will, versus the West Coast. And to have consistent product, we blend. Depending on what the crop is, we'll decide it's going to be 75-25, is it going to be 50-50, 60-40. You've always got to make the West Coast the lesser amount, if at all possible, because we can taste a difference, and we're paid to be consistent in our finished product. And we don't hide that information from our customer. You know, it's an open book. You know, we'll tell them, hey, you want consistent product, here's what we're going to have to do to maintain consistency for you. So our probe that's on that computer screen will validate temp, and then we'll have a supervisor come over and validate, and then we also call QA to the kettle to validate temperature. So we have a separate HACCP sheet that's filled out for every product to validate that, yes, we did get a lethality step, because all of our products, we only do one item left on our manufacturing list that's not heat treated, and that is besides the eggs, right? We're not cooking the eggs in that egg bake deal, and that's a pesto sauce that we do for someone, and we're trying to get out of it. Because if the way the world works right now, if you don't have a lethality step and you can't prove it, you're setting yourself up for problems. There are people that do cold processing, and we let them do that. If somebody comes to us and says, we want a cold soup, I say, well, I'm going to cook it. If you want to serve it cold, you can. I can validate it's safe, but we kill step everything. And sometimes it hurts, but you have to. You just, you know, if I have a customer coming in, we make sure there are no formulas out there, and you just don't talk about it. You know, if they want to bring something up, they'll say, hey, we really like the Panera potato soup. You know, he said, okay, and do you want a soup like that? You know, and so we might say, well, we're not going to tell you the formula, but just understand those potatoes are fresh. And understand we're not going to run potato soup for you June, July, or August, or September, because potatoes are stored and they start to change, and so we don't run a fresh potato soup. But that's about all we'll share with them. The other stuff, you know, what's on all these, you know, you got to watch for the bloggers and everything, but you can go to their website and find out a lot of information. So we'll have customers come to us and say, hey, we know that it has this many milligrams of sodium, and, you know, could you build us something like it? So, but yeah, you do have to protect them, and you just don't talk about it. You just don't. You just don't.
Do you have any products that like you're competing with yourselves on? Like you're selling one product to the company and selling like a very similar product to a different company?
We do have, yeah, the question was, do we have any contradicting, if we're doing soups, for example, that we might sell to this customer and then we sell one that's very similar to the other customer. We have to be very careful of that when we're developing new products, because part of us want to say we know how successful this is, so we're going to go ahead and, but we do have to be very cautious to make sure the ingredient statement looks different, especially when they come to us and say, we want this customer's soup. Can you make that for us? When we already make it. We don't tell them we make it, but then you're saying, oh, holy cow, how am I going to develop this thing? And because they'll say, well, it's not as close as I want it. And then we say, well, maybe you need to go to somebody else. Because when you build those kinds of relationships, they're so hard to build. When you finally build them, you've got to protect them or you're in trouble. Yes?
What's your typical request from like clients and like how much freedom do you have to like incorporate like your own creativity and like, you know, like passion like with ingredients or formulas, or really like have strict guidelines?
It varies. We have some customers that are very, very specific on exactly what they want. And then we have other customers that'll say, you know, we want you to develop the next cheese sauce that we're going to run for an LTO. And we think we want Gruyere in it. So that gives us the freedom to be pretty creative if we want to be. But part of my job is when I'm dealing, I kind of deal with sales. About 33% of my time is spent on the road handling customers. 33% is spent in the lab, and the other 33% is in the plants. And sometimes it goes different ways. You know, the month of November and December, I was in the plants almost every day. But I'll ask them, I'll get real specific, saying, okay, do you want this viscosity? Do you want this? And I really drill them down. You know, when you say vegetarian, do you really, really mean vegetarian, or are you just saying you don't want meat product in it? So my job is to define the target really, really well, and then we can be creative. So yeah, we have plenty of projects that are fun where you can be creative. But at the end of the day, you still have probably some parameters you need to hit. You know, we developed a soup here a year ago for a customer, and they came back and they wanted 60 cents a pound taken out because everything's sold by pound. Well, that was more than half the product, you know. So, but we did it, and it's actually still on the market. So, yeah.
Sounds like you guys mostly manufacture things that are like on the culinary side. Do you guys manufacture things that are like the sweet side, something that the desserts or pastry chefs would use?
We do. We make, we do a pastry cream, we do a creme anglaise, we do flan. We make a flan base that's then sent to bakeries, and then they'll add their own almond paste to it to put in croissants. We do a raspberry, it's really a pain in the neck too. We do like a raspberry jam, and we cook it to a yield, which really is a struggle because you got the kettle open and there's so much steam coming off. But we're doing that because there's a bigger fish in that pond we're trying to get. So we're going down this road with that, but because eventually they're going to want soups, so we'll do this type of work. So we certainly do. We do caramel sauce. That was a big project for me. We do for a national chain was making caramel. And you know what it's like when you've got 3,200 pounds of caramel sauce boiling up the sides of up a kettle? It really, you know, I puckered up. I'm like, oh my God, I'm going to burn somebody. But we figured it out, and we can now make the caramel sauce. The cook time is about 28 minutes at 45 pounds of steam with the lids open, and we cook it to an 86% yield, and we wrote a process now. Me and the cooks, I would go there every time we ran, and we just kept dialing it in. And then, so the caramel sauce, they either wanted to heat it and put it on a steam table, or they wanted to be able to microwave it. There's an emulsion in a caramel sauce, right? You've got butter, this one happened to have dairy in it also. Well, the emulsion was coming out, and I told them, you gotta let me put an emulsifier in there, and they fought me and fought me. So finally, they had so many complaints, I put an emulsifier in there in the form of lecithin. And boom, product went away. And I showed them at different levels, depending on how much they wanted to brutally beat this sauce up. Because, you know, they'd put a 1 ounce serving in a microwave for 30 seconds. Stuff would be boiling, and I'm supposed to, you know, manage all this fat. So we do that as well. We also do, we do fruit for dysphagia patients. You can call it nutrition, folks. Dysphagia is a difficult in swallowing in the healthcare industry. And by the way, I would recommend when you're done with your degrees is look to the healthcare industry, because there's a huge amount of, I don't want to say openings, but there's a lot of progress being made in that area for people who have culinary, who have science, that can make better products, better tasting food for the healthcare industry. And I think that's the next big push. We're doing an awful lot. We have one line totally dedicated 6 days a week to that. And we do some mixed berry, we do peaches, we do pineapple, and we basically tighten it with pectin. It's all natural, and it goes into these little molds. So when you unmold it, it's a puree, but it looks like little berries. So when they can eat it, it's very soft for them to eat. So we do desserts like that as well. So question was, who owns the formula? We always try to own it, but if we have relationships with companies that we have contracts for, then the full specification shows that formula, and they can go to somebody else. In some of the business, they call it RFP. You guys heard of that, request for proposal? They'll send you the formulas, and they'll say bid on these soups. So you bid on it, and they say, okay, you're within range. Now start make samples and see if you can get approved. And that's old style thinking. That's really old style, and it still goes on today, but it doesn't build for long time relationship, because if we're in an RFP and somebody says, well, you know, you're not getting the potato soup and you're not going to get the broccoli soup this year, we're going to go to the other supplier. Well, guess how much energy I'm going to put into developing new products for them when they request. I'm not going to say no, but on the triage list, they're going to kind of get pushed aside and say, all right, I'll get it to you in 3 weeks versus 3 days. But if you're a partner of ours, we're going to have that agreement. We're going to knock samples out as quick as we can. But yes, if they own the formulas, they can go where they want. Our goal is to do consistent so they don't go anywhere. And that's the hard part, you know, is getting in there, engaging. You know, as leaders, you've got to remember you have to engage. And engaging is hard, because you know what? You've got your set of problems. She shows up and I say, how you doing? Oh God, I don't feel good today. It's the same old, same old. You've got your energy, and now you got to carry her. You got to carry her. But you got to figure out what buttons to push to get her to be successful today. Now multiply that by 30, 40 people, and that's what you're going to be faced with. And those kind of skill sets are really, really important. I read smart briefs every day on leadership and try to figure out new ways to motivate, lead, encourage, carry, drag, whatever it is, because your success is going to be based on how well you train other people and how well you engage them. And engaging is hard because it's like, I've been here 9 hours, now I got another shift coming on, and I have to engage them, and I know they're not happy, and I know they're upset, and da-da-da, but you got to rise above it. And it's hard. It's hard at times. Yeah?
Going off the same note, if a company drops the soup product, they no longer want to produce it, and you own the rights to it, down the line, will you revamp it and sell it to another company, or just keep it in cold storage?
Well, if we run product, they own it. For the most part, they don't stick us with it. But we won't take that formula and sell it to somebody else. Because we're custom, so pretty much all of our work is specific for a specific customer. So we wouldn't, that's kind of suicide if you did that. Yeah?
Is your company only located like Indiana, or do you have different?
Just Indiana. We have a plant in the southeast side of Indianapolis, one on the north side in a small town called Tipton, a little farming town, and then up in Kokomo where the automotive industry. We have those 3 plants. And our headquarters is in Tipton as well. So I tend to spend time in Tipton, but going into the plants is really, that's where the money is made, is in the plants. And the plants are cold, the floors are hard. You're up and down the catwalk a lot. You've got to be in good physical shape. You got to take care of yourself because it doesn't stop. The clock's going to come around and you're going to be due again. And you got to stay in good shape. And I have some members of my team that aren't taking care of themselves, and by Thursday they're kind of walking like this because they've been in the plant. I said, you got to take care of yourself, because part of their pay is doing that. So, do you have a question? Yeah, they asked me, do we ever turn down business? You hate to do that, but yeah, if we can't produce it safely and be happy with it, we won't do it. We just turned down a bunch of business because they wanted dressings and they wanted some other cold stuff, and we're not built for that, and we're going to be unsuccessful, and we're not going to be consistent. Yeah, the question was, what are our goals for our company, short term and long term? I'll tell you this: we just spent $43 million expanding a plant, and I'm not an owner. I'm treated like one, but I'm not an owner. So I have to weigh in on a lot of decisions. And I vocalize. I'll raise my hand. And if I don't have anything to add, I don't go to the meeting. But $43 million is a big, big bite. So trying to run that plant, well, I just found out 2 weeks ago, they're going to spend another $10 million and put in 4 more kettles. I said, why? Why? Can't we just get ahead? And they said, well, you know what? Our R&D department has done such a good job, the plant's going to be at capacity by July. So our long-term goals, our always long-term goal is to train within, be consistent, and make sure we take care of those 450 employees. Short-term goal for me is to make every one of the cooks better. I think we can be better, and our yields are always there and everything, but I want to focus internally. We spend so much time focusing externally, dealing with the other, serving research and development departments from chains, that you've got to focus internally and make sure that, the young gal that's pushing that 400-pound VMAG for 8 hours, is she okay? Is she trained right? Are we giving her the best tools? Is there an easier way to help her? And that's really important to us, because if we don't take care of our employees, we're never going to have the bags that are going into that freezer. And it takes a lot of energy, because remember, their goals aren't the same as mine. Their goal is to, just get a paycheck this Thursday and, hope to come to work on Monday. And so always my long-term goal is to grow them, but those are probably the 2 big things. 2 big things, train internally. Yeah?
We have time for one more question.
Okay, fire away. Turnover was the question. In our plants, you're always going to have some level of turnover, probably about 8% turnover, because they're folks that just don't want to work. You know what I mean? I always tell them, if you can find out how to get paid by not working, let me know. So we have that kind of turnover. After that, we have very limited turnover, very limited. We just had our holiday party. We had people who had 30 years of service, 20 years of service, 15 years of service. Most of our supervisors have been there a minimum of 15 years. Interesting note, by the way, a lot of our supervisors in our plants are women. Plant managers, production supervisors, group leaders are women, because our labor pool is women. Moms who might have gotten their kids in school and they're coming in. And people are surprised when they come into our plants and they see, Liz is in charge of, $40 million worth of stuff, or Alita is responsible for this or that, and so it's kind of interesting to come into our plant and see that. So, but we don't have a lot of turnover at that. R&D, I don't have much turnover. Well, we do evaluations is a question. We do evaluations every year, and once again, this goes back to your leadership. You are responsible for making your team strong. Whether you like it or not, you're responsible. So you have to set goals. We have a mission and a vision for every employee. And then how do they get there? And how are we going to help them get there? And their bonuses are based on them meeting those requirements. So if you're leading 25 people, you're responsible for 25 bonuses. So if you sit down with Eric and say, you know what, Eric, you haven't fixed your attendance, you haven't been following through like I've told you, you're not going to get your bonus this quarter. Simple as that. Now, you can maybe get it next. We'll add it on to the next one, but you got to improve. So there's a lot of that one-on-one interaction to let them know that there's money at the end of the rainbow if that's what it's going to take to motivate you. So that's how. Final thought. The dean and I spoke earlier, and one thing that just kind of came out was, in your situation, you got a lot going on right now. There's a lot going on. You're trying to do well, and you have all these types of what might look like hurdles. Don't let it overwhelm you. If you fix one thing a day, that's a good thing, right? But you've got to prepare yourself, and you've got to show up for opportunities. Opportunities don't always show themselves and wave their hand like an opportunity, right? But that's how you get noticed, and that's how you network, and that's how you meet people. If you don't want to go to a function or a meeting, try to think, well, who might I run into? Who might I find? Who might I hear speak? And opportunities a lot of times looks like a lot of work, and a good opportunity generally is going to be that. So my history with Johnson & Wales was they just gave me opportunities. They didn't spoon feed me. They worked me. But you know what? It was an opportunity. I always looked at them as opportunities, and I took advantage of them with the proper spirit in mind. Not what can I get out of these guys. And that has allowed me to go through life and stand here in front of you guys, which I never dreamed would happen. I remember working on Distinguished Visiting Chef dinners, and I'd look at their printouts, I'd think, God, these guys are good, And then when they reached out to me, I couldn't believe it. I was like, you got to be kidding me. So this is a really big thrill for me to be back here and be in front of you guys and to share what my new discipline looks like with a chef background. Because trust me, they trust the white coat out there big time. You go on a sales call, he goes in a suit and tie, you go in a chef coat, people are going to be drawn to you, drawn to the white coat because you can play offense and defense and they trust you. Sales guys with coats on have a much more difficult time. It just is. I go with our CEO, go to cuttings, and he's supposed to lead it, and all of a sudden you see Jim starting to back off. And you know me, I'm going after it. So I get out there and it works out well. So I think that's the best final thought I've got. All right. Thank you. Tori. Nice job, Tori.
Thank you very much, Chef.
You're welcome.
Outstanding. Great job. Again, give it up for our DVC Scholarship Award. Fantastic advice, fantastic words here today from an alum, person who was in your seat just 30 years ago. An example of what hard work, determination, and a little bit of talent can take you. It can take you all kinds of places that you can't even think of or conceive of today. But yet, you can have achieved an enormous success. We talked earlier about luck favors the prepared. Show up prepared, you will go far. So thank you, Chef. This concludes our programming today. There will be a luncheon later on where we will present some awards to the chef and to our students. But for all of you, thank you for coming today, and drive safely.
Yeah, thank you.